This is just gospel according to Janelle.
Kody's anger had always been loud, explosive, impossible to ignore. But this time, something else started creeping in, something he was never prepared to face: panic. It began the moment Christine finally spoke up, not in frustration, not in tears, but with a calmness that shook him harder than any argument ever had. She wasn't yelling, she wasn't pleading, she wasn't trying to make him understand. She was done, and that was the part Kody never saw coming. He had banked on Christine's loyalty being unbreakable for years. She was the wife who smiled while hurting, the one holding the household together, the one who still believed in the dream long after the dream had stopped believing in her. But something shifted, at first gradual, then sudden, the dam finally breaking under too much pressure. Her silence wasn't resignation, it was preparation, and Kody had missed every sign. The breaking point didn't come from one explosive fight. It came from the culmination of moments, the holidays where she felt invisible, the decisions made without her input, the favoritism she watched unfold like a slow-moving train wreck. And through it all, she had waited for Kody to notice, to step in, to fix what he had broken. Instead, he blamed her reactions, not his actions. He accused her of overreacting, misunderstanding, creating problems where he believed none existed. The truth hit Kody only when Christine finally said a sentence he never expected to hear: "I don't trust you anymore." That single line echoed in his chest like a shockwave. Trust was the foundation of everything, the one thing he believed he still had from at least one wife. But now, even that was gone. When a man who has always been in control suddenly feels that control slipping, the reaction becomes unpredictable. Kody's anger rose quickly, as it had always done. He blamed the stress, the cameras, the expectations, the wives, even the lifestyle itself. But something else was happening beneath the surface, something he didn't recognize in himself: fear. Not of losing the family, not fear of public embarrassment, but of one thing: losing the version of himself he had always believed was unshakable. It was Christine's new confidence that unnerved him. She wasn't asking for explanations. She wasn't trying to fix things. She wasn't waiting for him to apologize. She was speaking with an unmistakable clarity that set Kody reeling. Because if Christine, the most loyal, the most patient, the most supportive, had reached her limit, what did that say about him? As word spread among the family that Christine was about to reveal things she had never said before, Kody felt the walls closing in. He tried to get ahead of it, dismissing her feelings and saying she was rewriting history. But the more he talked, the more obvious it became. He wasn't fighting for the marriage, he was fighting for his image. Panic disguised as anger. He stormed around the house, trying to rally the remaining wives, hoping someone would defend him. But the reactions were far from what he expected. Everyone had seen this coming long before he did. Some stayed quiet, some sympathized with Christine, and others just stepped back, not wanting to get pulled into his emotional storm. The more isolated he felt, the louder he became. Meanwhile, Christine had reached a point of complete clarity. She wasn't looking for revenge. She wasn't trying to destroy him. She simply told the truth. And the truth exposed cracks he had spent years pretending weren't there. She spoke about the neglect, the broken promises, the emotional distance, the double standards. She spoke about the ways she had been pushed aside long before she ever walked away. And every revelation hit Kody harder than the last. Deep down, he knew that she wasn't lying. That was the part that terrified him most. Because Christine had absolutely nothing to gain by speaking up, but Kody had everything to lose. It wasn't until she exposed the final pieces of her experience that a picture couldn't be denied. This was not a decision made in an instant. It wasn't under anyone's duress. It wasn't drama. This was a woman reclaiming her life after years of feeling unseen. And when she finally spoke, she did not falter. There was no hesitation, no regret. She was steady, firm, resolute. Kody watched the shift. Christine's words didn't just echo in the room. They detonated. When she was done talking, everything around Kody started to blur. Anger wasn't enough anymore. What he felt was fear, a deep, crawling panic that he had tried so hard to ignore for months now, maybe even years. But here, Christine stood, so confident and cool, and he couldn't turn his eyes away from the truth she held up as if in a mirror. The silence lay heavy between them. Christine didn't flinch. She didn't back down. She had long since learned his raised voice wasn't power. It was a shield he used whenever he felt the world slipping out of his grasp. This time, nothing would shield him. He tried to speak, but what came out first wasn't a sentence. It was a broken sound, something between a breath and a growl. Christine, you can't just twist everything like that. That's not what happened. You know that. But Christine only folded her arms, not with anger, but with the composure of a person who had finally stepped outside of a storm and realized the sun had been waiting the whole time. I am not twisting anything, Kody. I am telling the truth you've been terrified someone would say out loud. His jaw clenched. He hated how steady her voice was, how unshakable she had become. For years, she'd swallowed her pain to keep the peace. But the old Christine was gone, and he had no idea how to handle this new version of her. She took a step closer, not aggressively, just enough that he couldn't avoid facing her. You lost control because you lost me. You lost the one wife who always tried to keep your world from collapsing. And now that it is collapsing, you're angry at everyone except yourself. Those words hit him more strongly than he would have anticipated. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally forced something out. You want me to take the blame for everything? Is that what this is? Another attempt to rewrite history so you look like the victim? Christine laughed, the sad, exhausted kind. Kody, I don't need to rewrite anything. You wrote it all yourself. Every time you chose someone else over me. Every time you left me alone with the kids. Every time you blamed me for your own choices. You want to talk about rewriting? You've been rewriting our marriage for years. Her words were calm, but they were sharp enough to cut through all the excuses he used to comfort himself. Kody's breathing grew uneven. The panic came in waves. First denial, then anger, then something even he didn't recognize. Because beneath the rage, there was fear. Real fear. The kind he avoided at all costs. Fear of being wrong. Fear of being exposed. Fear that Christine was right. He tried to step around her, as if the physical movement could untangle the emotional mess tightening around him. But Christine wasn't done, nor was it out of spite. She simply had carried these truths for too long. You're afraid, she stated, matter-of-factly. He spun. No, I'm not afraid. I'm frustrated. I'm tired of being blamed. I'm tired of being painted like the villain because you couldn't handle the lifestyle. Christine shook her head. No, you're afraid of losing control. You're afraid of the truth making you look at yourself, and that's not my problem anymore. The words hung in the air like smoke. Kody was shaking now, not enough for the untrained eye to notice, but Christine saw it instantly. She'd lived with those reactions for years. His pride was cracking, and once Kody Brown's pride cracked, anger was all he had left to hold the pieces together. His voice dropped, quieter but more intense. You think you've won, Christine? You think walking away makes you better, stronger? This isn't about winning, she replied softly. It's about finally telling the truth. That made him flinch. The truth had always been Christine's advantage. She didn't weaponize it. She didn't twist it. She didn't hide behind it. She simply spoke it. And that, more than anything, terrified him. He pointed at her, that familiar gesture he always used when he felt cornered. You don't understand what I've had to deal with. The pressure, the expectations, the responsibility. Christine gently interjected. Kody's anger had been boiling long before Christine ever spoke publicly, but part 3 of this unfolding emotional storm reveals the moment that anger turned into something much darker, panic. For years, he'd managed to believe that he could control the narrative, control the story, and hold the family's reputation under his grip. The second Christine stepped forward and shared what she had held inside for decades, everything shifted. Suddenly, the authority he once enjoyed wasn't just questioned, it was collapsing. And in this segment, we explore exactly how that panic began to show, even in moments where Kody tried desperately to act confident. After Christine's bombshell went public, her steady voice detailing her emotional depletion, the broken promises, and the loneliness she lived with, fans began picking apart every word. And every viewer's comment, every message online, every trending clip piled on more pressure on Kody. He could see it all in real time. For the first time in years, the stage light wasn't flattering. It was stark, pitiless, and focused squarely on him. His anger, which earlier used to be poured on the wives behind closed doors, now fell flat. He couldn't yell at Christine, he couldn't force her to take anything back, and he couldn't shut viewers up. So he started to try to rewrite what had happened, saying the story was far more complex, that Christine was being emotional, overreacting, or distorting things. But even as he spoke, his hands shook, his breathing turned tight, and through the cracks, the fear came seeping. In conversations with the remaining wives, he tried to act like he didn't care, like Christine's words were meaningless. But the more he talked, the more obvious it became that her truth had pierced the one thing Kody never wanted to lose: control. Mary saw it first. While he paced the room back and forth, ranting about loyalty and betrayal, Mary noticed the way he kept checking his phone, refreshing notifications, wondering what new clip or headline might be spreading. His voice wavered, not with anger anymore, but with worry he couldn't hide. He told Mary that Christine was manipulating public opinion. He said the audience didn't understand the real situation. But even as he spoke, there was panic in his voice. If the fans believed Christine, then the foundation of the family image he built could crumble entirely. Janelle saw it too. When she sat across from him, Kody attempted to regain his old confidence by saying Christine was being dramatic and the audience was overreacting. But the second Janelle remained calm and didn't feed into his anger, he snapped. He began demanding answers. Why wasn't she defending him? Why wasn't she correcting people online? Why wasn't she standing up for the truth? But Janelle didn't budge. In that stillness, Kody felt something he wasn't used to: fear of losing another wife. The panic sharpened. What if Christine's words pushed Janelle even further away? What if this time he couldn't bring her back? Even Robin, the one he always believed would never turn against him, began to notice how unstable he seemed. His behavior changed. Less patience, more anxiety, shorter temper, more restless nights. She tried reassuring him, telling him the fans didn't understand the complexity of plural marriage, but it didn't help. Because deep down, Kody knew that Christine wasn't lying. Every story she shared was built on years of silent suffering he ignored. And if the fans believed her, then they would start to question him in ways he couldn't escape. He couldn't hide behind editing. He couldn't hide behind explanations. He couldn't hide behind hurt pride. The truth was out, and people were listening. Producers noticed the change too. During interviews, Kody tried to sit still, tried to breathe deeply, tried to gather himself before the camera light came on. But the second he started talking about Christine, the anger spilled out again. He leaned forward, pointing, raising his voice, accusing Christine of being reckless with the family's reputation. The producers said nothing, just let him vent, but they could tell he wasn't in control. He was reacting, spinning, losing the ability to frame the story in his favor. One producer wrote in her notes that Kody appeared agitated, defensive, visibly shaken whenever Christine's name came up. And the fans saw it too. They clipped moments from the episodes, slowed them down, analyzed facial expressions, and pointed out the contradiction between what Kody said and what his eyes were revealing. They weren't just judging him, they were diagnosing him. And that made the panic worse. All of a sudden, he wasn't the authoritative father figure. He wasn't the confident leader. He was the man desperately trying to prove he wasn't wrong, even as everything around him suggested otherwise. Privately, Kody began to question everything. He wondered if he should confront Christine directly, ask her to soften her tone, ask her to explain things. But he knew she wouldn't. Christine had found her strength. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. That terrified him more than anything. Because for years, it was fear and guilt that provided the tools. Without those, he had no power. He paced the dark hallway at night, replaying the words she said publicly. Words like freedom, self-respect, healing, emotional abandonment. Each phrase felt like a blow to the version of himself he tried to maintain. He was also concerned about the impact on his reputation in the long run. If Christine continued to talk, and she would, how would the audience feel about him in seasons to come? What would new viewers think if they watched the episodes consecutively? And most importantly, what would the media make of this storyline? He did not want to be villainized, not just for a season, but permanently. He panicked with the thought of headlines screaming that he was the reason Christine left him because of emotional neglect. Robin tried to be calm, told him to let it go and focus on their own family, but Kody couldn't, not when the whole internet was talking about Christine's side of things. He turned to Robin and said he was going to fight back. He was going to tell his side, the real side, and he was going to expose all the things the public didn't know. Except when he started gathering his... This story is where the cracks widened into fractures he could no longer hide. As Christine's words spread across social platforms and podcast clips, the pressure didn't just rise, it exploded into full-blown crisis mode. For the first time, Kody couldn't spin the narrative, point fingers, or hide behind the family image that had once protected him. Everything fell apart in real time, and even he knew it. It all started with the unexpected visit from producers. Kody was trying to collect himself, pacing in his living room, replaying Christine's interview in his head. Each one of her sentences cut deep. Frustration, neglect, emotional dismissal, broken promises. He could handle angry fans, he could handle social media storms, but what he couldn't handle was the truth coming right from someone who lived it. He had no shield, no filter, no edit, just raw truth cutting straight through his well-crafted image. When the producer knocked, Kody froze. He knew why they were there. Not for a friendly check-in, not for casual filming questions. No, this was damage control, and everyone involved understood it. The moment he opened the door, their expressions told him everything. They had watched the interview, they had seen the reactions, and they needed answers. The producers sat down across from him. Kody tried to play it cool, leaning back with an exaggerated sigh, pretending not to care. But his hands were shaking. His voice carried the tension he couldn't hide. He tried to dismiss her words as emotional exaggerations and revisionist history, but the producers didn't buy it. They had filmed everything. They had the raw footage. They knew the truth. One producer gently pushed back, reminding him of specific moments, arguments, isolation, dismissive comments, choices that had caused deep pain. The more they confronted him with reality, the more his defensiveness turned into stuttering frustration. He wasn't used to people calling him out. He wasn't used to anyone holding him accountable. And now, his usual tactics weren't working. For the first time, he wasn't in control of the room. He paced anxiously, going from wall to wall, muttering under his breath as he tried to pull together a response that made him look like the victim, as he always tried to do. This time, though, the producers weren't playing along. They needed transparency, not excuses. And deep down, that terrified him. Christine's revelation had forced the whole family to face emotions they'd suppressed for years. Privately, Janelle reached out to Christine to check on her. They didn't always move in sync, but in that moment, they had an understanding of each other that was more clear than ever. Janelle knew what it was like to be silent for too long. She knew what it was like to be dismissed, blamed for things she had never done, told she wasn't loyal enough. Christine reassured her, but she also admitted something none of them had expected. She hadn't planned to say everything she did. It just happened. The truth had spilled out because it had been held in too long. It was healing, but it was also terrifying. She knew the impact it would have. She knew Kody wouldn't take it well. And she was right. Meanwhile, Mary also saw the interview, and her feelings were complicated. She wasn't angry at Christine. She wasn't shocked either. If anything, she felt a strange mix of relief and regret. Relief because the truth was finally being spoken. Regret because she had never found the courage to say it herself. She had lived through similar experiences but had remained silent for years, out of hope, fear, or maybe just habit. Christine's honesty forced her to face her own unspoken pain. Robin, on the other hand, was livid, not at Christine personally, but at the consequences Christine's words caused. She immediately feared the fallout for the show, for Kody's reputation, for their home life. She paced the kitchen, ranting about misrepresentations, as Kody sat silently at the table, replaying the interview again and again. Robin didn't fully understand that the panic wasn't about Christine's revelations. It was about the fact that Kody had lost control of the family narrative. For years, Kody had relied on selective explanations, half-truths, and pure emotional persuasion to keep people aligned with him. But Christine's new confidence and public honesty had shattered that system. He couldn't twist it. He couldn't undo it. And that loss of power terrified her more than anything she actually said. It was then that the panic worsened and one of his older children called him. It wasn't a warm conversation. It wasn't supportive. It wasn't forgiving. It was direct, pointed, emotional. They confronted him about everything that the world had just learned. They didn't want to hear the excuses anymore. They were tired of the blame, tired of hearing him minimize the pain he had caused. Kody tried to defend himself, but every attempt sounded hollow. That child pushed back harder, saying they were angry, not just at what he did, but because he still refused to acknowledge it. It shook him to the core of his being. What was even worse was the total silence from his other kids. No messages, no calls, not even the passive online reactions. The quiet felt louder than the confrontation. These were relationships he had assumed he would reclaim on his own timeline, in his own way, when he was ready. But now, everything was slipping at once, and he didn't know how to stop it. Meanwhile, Christine's experience was just the opposite. Messages streamed in from women who identified with her situation, thanking her for speaking out. The encouragement, support, and validation of people who had watched her for years buoyed her up. She wasn't celebrating the fallout. She didn't want Kody to suffer. She wanted freedom, healing, and peace. But she couldn't control how people interpreted the truth that she'd shared. She spent the day with her kids, making sure they were okay with the attention the interview was getting. They were proud of her. They told her she had carried silence long enough. They reminded her that honesty wasn't an attack. It was a necessary part of healing. Their love strengthened her, grounded her in a way she hadn't felt in years. It was the reassurance she needed. As night fell, Kody sat alone in his room, staring at his phone. The silence from the fans who once defended him was deafening. The comments online were brutal. People weren't mocking him. What they were doing was dissecting every moment where he had failed to show compassion or accountability. Clips from past seasons resurfaced. Analysts and podcast hosts were unraveling years of behavior. And for the first time, the public conversation wasn't on his side. He scrolled through comments, his fingers gripping the phone tightly enough to crack it. Every message felt like a fresh blow. Every caption, every clip, every opinion brought a new wave of fear. Not because he cared what the public thought, but because he could feel his influence slipping away. And that was something he didn't know how to handle. Robin tried to reassure them, but nothing she could say got through. Not because he wanted reassuring. He wanted a way out, a way to regain control, reshape the narrative, reclaim his image, which he believed he still merited. But nothing worked. Not the explanations rehearsed, not the defensive statements prepared, not the emotional appeals he would make on camera. Everything he tried collapsed under the weight of Christine's truth. The panic he felt wasn't about one interview. It wasn't about one moment. It was about everything finally catching up to him. Years of decisions, years of neglect, years of blame. The consequences were no longer abstract. They were here, they were real, and they were impossible to escape. And for the first time, in a long time, Kody realized he wasn't in control of the story anymore. Kody paced the empty living room long after everyone else had gone to bed, his hands shaking as he replayed Christine's words over and over again. He had expected her to lash out, maybe accuse him of favoritism, maybe even expose their private arguments. But what she actually revealed cut deeper than anything he was prepared for. She didn't just say he failed her. She said she no longer feared him, no longer cared about his opinions, and no longer saw him as the man she once trusted. And that shift, the removal of emotional power, hit him like nothing else. The panic creeping through him wasn't just about public embarrassment. It wasn't about cameras or fans or social media posts. It was the fear of realizing that for the first time in decades, someone he had relied on emotionally had walked away without hesitation and seemed to be doing just fine without him. That kind of independence terrified him more than he wanted to admit. Christine woke up lighter that morning, having spent years explaining, justifying, and apologizing for her own needs. This was the first time in her adult life she had spoken her truth out loud, and the weight that finally really lifted from her chest was something she hadn't expected. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't bitter. She was simply done. And that scared Kody a whole lot more than open conflict ever did. As the day went on, word of her interview spread much faster than anyone would have predicted. Fans began parsing her tone, breaking down her comments, and pulling out key moments that seemed to expose details the show had never captured. Clips circulated online, amassing millions of views within hours. Comment sections were brutal, attacking Kody's behavior, his leadership, and how he treats the women. It was that kind of online storm that keeps any public figure up at night. But for Kody, the panic wasn't about public opinion. It was about losing the narrative. He always thought he was the one in charge of the family, the one giving a sense of direction, the one keeping all of the pieces together. Now it was crystal clear that Christine was slowly but surely becoming the voice people trusted, someone unafraid to be transparent, honest, and raw. And with every honest word she spoke, Kody felt another piece of control slipping through his fingers. Meanwhile, Christine's inbox was flooded with messages from women around the world thanking her for her bravery. People shared their own stories of walking away from what wasn't healthy for them, from relationships that wouldn't hear their voices, from patterns that siphoned them dry. The community that she created, more or less overnight, amazed her and empowered her. She had spent so long feeling small, yet all of a sudden inspiring others to find their strength. Kody watched this happening and felt his chest tighten all the more. It wasn't just that Christine had left him, she was thriving, and there was nothing more painful to him than to watch someone whom he had underestimated rise above everything he once used to hold over them. He always thought Christine would struggle without the family structure, without his guidance, and without the familiarity of their old life. Instead, she was building something better, something stronger. His panic mounted silently but surely. The constant calls from production, the questions from the crew, the messages from people wanting to know his side of the story, all pressured him. He refused to admit he was losing control, yet he felt it with every second. The other wives seemed to sense that something had changed, though most didn't say anything. They seemed to feel his frustration, his short temper, how he snapped at small things, and how he paced around the room as if he were trying to outrun his thoughts. But Christine, she wasn't pacing. She wasn't hiding. She was moving forward with clarity. A few days after her interview, Christine made another quiet yet powerful move. She posted a video thanking her supporters, acknowledging the emotional journey, and reassuring all that she was healing. The comments blew up with encouragement. Her calmness, the grounding energy, and the genuine smile gave people the feeling of her finally at peace. Kody watched the video alone. No anger, no yelling, just silence. A silence so loud he could hear his heartbeat in his ears. And he knew what the world saw. A woman who had reclaimed her voice. A woman who wasn't looking back. A woman who had learned to live without him and liked it. The panic in him was not just the fear of losing influence, but the realization that he couldn't rewrite her story anymore. He couldn't downplay her feelings. He couldn't explain away her hurt. She had spoken her truth, and people believed her because she had nothing to gain and nothing left to lose. That kind of honesty was bulletproof. And deep down, a part of him knew she wasn't lying. As the days passed, the tension around him settled into a quiet dread. He knew another season of the show would highlight this shift. He knew the viewers would analyze every look, every comment, every reaction from him. He knew his frustration would be dissected frame by frame. And worst of all, he knew he couldn't stop what was coming. The story was no longer his to hide. Christine continued on with her life, close to her children, attending to her happiness, and allowing herself to enjoy the peace she fought so long for. She didn't think about Kody's panic. She didn't think about his anger or the fallout. She just moved on. Kody wanted to be able to do that too, but something inside refused to release. Not because he loved Christine the way he loved when they first got married, but because losing Christine meant losing the version of himself he tried to preserve. She was the one who knew the cracks in his armor, the broken promises, the emotional voids, the inconsistencies. She was the one who had witnessed the slow unraveling of his role in the family. And that thought haunted him most of all. By the end of that week, Kody wasn't angry anymore, not outwardly. He was something worse, silent, anxious, and uncertain. A man who once thought he had everything under control now had no idea what the next chapter would bring. And the panic in him wasn't temporary. It was the beginning of a truth he didn't want to face. Christine's voice wasn't just exposing what happened, it was exposing who he had become. And there was no coming back from that.